Okay, let's think about this. How do these huge global power shifts actually affect us, right here, right now? Today, we're diving deep into something pretty pivotal, Europe's defense strategy. It seems to be at a real crossroads.
Yeah, it feels like it's undergoing a fundamental transformation. And this whole discussion, it's based on a really detailed report. It's called The Revolution in Military Affairs, Charting the Future of European Defense Strategy. So our mission today really is to unpack what's driving this massive shift, understand the strategic implications, and they are profound, and maybe explore some surprising future scenarios for European security.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is that this isn't just about, buying new tanks or fancier jets. It's much deeper, a fundamental rethinking of how Europe actually defends itself. And it's driven by, well, massive geopolitical uncertainty, for one, and also rapid technological disruption. In defense circles, people often call this a revolution in military affairs, or RMA. Basically, it's a time when new tech, new doctrines, new ways of organizing forces just completely change the nature of conflict itself. And this deep dive, I think it's going to reveal some critical insights, especially about how Europe's current defense capabilities, they're becoming really misaligned with the actual threats they're facing today.
Okay, misalignment. Let's dig into that. So what does this all mean? To really get this shift, we need to understand how Europe's defense posture, which for decades, it leans so heavily on American tech, right, under the NATO umbrella. How is that suddenly, well, maybe not suddenly, but certainly crumbling under new pressures? What exactly is cracking here?
Well, if you connect it to the bigger picture, it comes down to this growing misalignment of capabilities you mentioned. Just think about it for a second. U.S. weapons systems, long-range strategic bombers, these huge carrier groups, complex satellite command systems, they're really built for projecting power globally, across vast distances.
Right, projecting power outwards.
Exactly. But Europe today, it faces very different kinds of threats, much more localized. Think short-range stuff, terrain-specific challenges, and these really complex cyber hybrid scenarios.
Digital warfare, yeah.
Right. So this misalignment, it's not just inefficient spending, though it is that too. It means Europe might be perfectly geared up to fight, yesterday's war, which leaves it potentially vulnerable to today's threats, these evolving, diffuse threats.
And like you said, it's not happening in a vacuum. This ties directly into those broader geopolitical shifts we're all seeing. There's still the persistent threat from Russia.
Yeah.
Especially as you touch on their doctrine of hybrid warfare, that mix of conventional forces, cyber attacks, disinformation. It's like they're constantly changing the rules of the game.
Precisely. And it also brings up a really crucial question. What happens when the U.S. role as a sort of global police force starts to, well, erode? The U.S. shift in focus strategically towards the Indo-Pacific. That's not just about moving ships around.
No, it's a major reprioritization.
It is. It forces Europe to fundamentally redefine its own security identity. This isn't some background noise anymore. It really amps up the urgency for Europe to shoulder much more of its own defense burden, maybe, for the first time in decades, really on its own terms.
And it's not just external pressures, is it? You've got internal political stuff happening too. Rising populism in some places, budget constraints are always there, and frankly, different national interests diverging sometimes.
Yeah.
That must make pan-European integration pretty challenging.
It does. Extremely challenging.
So, okay, you've got these internal challenges kind of amplifying the external shifts. How are European leaders actually trying to chart a new course? What specific steps, maybe even controversial ones, are they advocating for to bridge this gap?
Well, the big push is for what they call strategic autonomy.
Strategic autonomy. Heard that phrase a lot.
Yeah, and it basically means developing their own indigenous capabilities so they can respond to regional threats without relying so heavily on external powers like the U.S. It's a fundamental shift, really, from being primarily a security consumer to becoming a security producer. That changes Europe's whole geopolitical identity.
So what does that look like in practice?
It means tangible steps. Things like expanding Europe's own defense industrial capacity, building up their own industries, developing homegrown missile defense systems, that's a big one, and significantly boosting joint research into really cutting-edge areas, AI-powered warfare, drone swarms.
Drone swarms, wow.
Yeah. It's not just about fancier weapons, though. It's about radically speeding up the decision-making cycle. The advantage goes to whoever can process info and react fastest.
Okay, that makes sense conceptually, but getting, 27 different EU nations plus others on the same page for something this critical? That sounds like a monumental challenge. What mechanisms are actually being used? How do they achieve tighter coordination, interoperability?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy, but there is an increasing push for that tighter military coordination. And we are seeing specific examples trying to overcome those national hurdles. You've got PESCO, that's Permanent Structured Cooperation. It's specifically designed to promote interoperability. Member states commit to joint defense projects.
Okay, there you go.
And then there's the EDF, the European Defense Fund. That's aimed more at streamlining defense procurement, trying to make it more efficient, more cohesive across member states by co-funding collaborative R&D.
Right. So this brings us down to the sort of operational reality. How do these big strategic shifts actually filter down? How do they reshape what a European military unit actually looks like on the ground? What will European militaries become?
Well, the report really highlights a significant shift towards what it calls agile modular forces.
Agile and modular, meaning
Meaning forces designed to be more mobile, adaptable, quick to react, units you can combine or break apart easily depending on the mission. And their main focus is squarely on responding to those hybrid threats we talked about. That whole spectrum from cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns right up to irregular militia incursions.
so less about massive tank battles, maybe?
Potentially, yeah. The preferred model seems to involve smaller, highly trained units, but critically backed by very sophisticated intelligence gathering and electronic warfare tools.
And it's becoming clearer and clearer that future conflicts aren't just fought on land or sea. We hear so much more now about new domains. Where else are defense strategies pivoting?
Absolutely. There's a huge emphasis now on the cyber and space domains. This is critical. It means developing satellite resilience, for instance, and sovereign launch capabilities, making sure Europe can put its own assets into space reliably without depending on others. That's vital for modern warfare.
Communications,
Yeah.
intelligence.
Exactly. It also involves creating robust cyber warfare frameworks, both offensive and defensive capabilities. And crucially, it's about integrating battlefield data in real time. Using advanced tech like AI, maybe even quantum computing down the line.
Quantum, wow. Okay.
No, when you think about quantum, it's about future-proofing communications, securing them against threats that could break today's encryption overnight. The battlefield is definitely expanding.
Okay, so we've laid out this really complex landscape, the drivers, the strategic shifts. The report then kind of dares to look into the crystal ball, right? What futures could actually be waiting for Europe's defense?
It does. It outlines 4 key scenarios, painting quite different pictures for where European defense might go. First, there's the integrated European force.
Oh.
Think a pan-European rapid deployment force, maybe with a unified command structure.
Like a true EU army.
Nothing moving in that direction, yeah. The report rates its likelihood as medium. It offers more cohesion, obviously, but needs immense political will, which is, the tricky part.
Always. Okay, what's next?
Second scenario, technological leapfrog. Here, Europe invests really heavily in next-gen tech. Hypersonics, AI, maybe even energy weapons. This is seen as having a high likelihood. The aim is to create an asymmetric advantage, kind of skipping a generation to counter more conventional threats differently.
Interesting.
Third is fragmented defense. This is the less optimistic one. Countries basically double down on their own national priorities. Cooperation stalls. This could seriously weaken collective readiness. The likelihood is rated low to medium, but the risk is significant. Think NATO inefficiencies, slow response times.
Not ideal. And the last one.
Finally, there's the dual-track doctrine. This also has a high likelihood rating. Here, countries essentially try to do both. They maintain their NATO alignment, rely on the alliance, but simultaneously develop their own parallel autonomous capabilities.
Hedging their bets, sort of.
Exactly. It's an attempt to balance national sovereignty with those crucial alliance commitments. A pragmatic approach, maybe.
4 distinct paths. As you, listening, consider these possibilities, which one feels most plausible to you? And maybe why? Something to think about. Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. We've covered a lot of ground. What are the absolute key takeaways from this deep dive into Europe's defense revolution?
I think the core insight really is that this misalignment with American systems, it's moved from being a kind of background issue to a genuine, profound strategic vulnerability. Europe simply can't ignore it anymore. And the report's key recommendations for European nations, they're pretty clear and they feel urgent. First, accelerate their own indigenous R&D and procurement cycles, get things moving faster. Second, establish a truly shared threat perception and a unified response doctrine. Get on the same page about what the threats are and how to react.
Easier said than done, but essential.
Absolutely. Third, prioritize those hybrid defense capabilities, especially in cyber and space. That's where the game is changing fast. And finally, critically, invest in training and, just as importantly, retaining digitally native defense personnel. You need people who understand this new landscape.
Wow, what a journey. From understanding that historical transatlantic dependence to envisioning these agile, tech-savvy forces and navigating those potential future scenarios, it really does sound like Europe is at a genuine inflection point.
It absolutely is. And maybe the final thought the report leaves us with is this. A successful revolution in military affairs, it isn't just about the hardware. It's not just about the gadgets. Fundamentally, it's about political courage. The courage to redefine what sovereignty means, what resilience means, what deterrence means in this new era of distributed threats and increasingly decentralized warfare.
So the question for you is, what does it mean when nations start rethinking the very definition of security and defense in such a rapidly changing world?
Yeah.
How will these shifts impact the global balance of power and ultimately our interconnected future? Definitely something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.